Here at Physio Matters, we think physio matters. Join as a premium member now and access over 500 videos, get free tickets to shows and upgrades included. Access at home, work or on a unicycle to take your knowledge to the moon. physio-matters.com, more content than you can fit into a gym.
Hello and welcome to YouMatter. Hello and welcome to session 25 of YouMatter. This is a panel discussion on the subject of perfectionism, and I'm thrilled to be joined by three ladies, friends and fellow coaches, Sarah Pratt, Thea Jolly and Harriet Whaley-Cohen, all experts in perfectionism, and all with their own take on perfectionism, their own take, their own experience, their own insights. I learned so much through this conversation. There were aspects of perfectionism that I hadn't considered before, and also solutions I hadn't considered. Perhaps the most important part of this podcast is to move the conversation on from what we understand about perfectionism and our understanding of how rife it is in our profession, moving on to some things we can actually do to try and start to break down this sort of entrenched perfectionist situation that we find ourselves. So as ever, make yourself a cup of tea. It's a fairly long one, this one, but I'm sure the time will fly. Give yourself the time to listen carefully, listen with compassion. There will be moments where you feel you can identify with what's being said. There may be moments where your inner perfectionist is hailed to come out, and you may have reactions to that. So sit back with curiosity and compassion for yourself and your colleagues, and I hope you find that the session really useful. I'll be back at the end. Hello and welcome to session 25 of YouMatter, and I am thrilled today to be doing a panel session. I've done a few before. They're always a lot of fun. You always get loads of great information. And I have three good friends and coaches with me today. I have Sarah Pratt, Thea Jolly, and Harriet Whaley-Cohen. And I'll give you a brief introduction to these three lovely ladies. So Harriet is a speaker, facilitator, trainer, and coach with a background in psychology. She has a decade of experience in investments and another decade coaching senior women on confidence and leadership. She specializes in working with companies in traditionally male-dominated industries like banking, financial services, and tech. And she supports her clients to recruit and retain the best female talent at all levels, to shift their culture to one of outstanding allyship, and to get genuine return on investment on their gender-focused diversity, equity, and inequality initiatives. And also, Harriet gives talks on the toxicity of perfectionism and how to break free. So that was the bit that really hooked me and wanted me to invite Harriet to talk today, because that's definitely something that came up on my last episode when I was talking to Daniel Biggs about his research into perfectionism, specifically in the healthcare professions. I also have with me Thea Jolly. Thea is currently spending a fortnight in Cornwall by herself writing a book. She wasn't quite sure whether she wanted me to drop that in or not, because there's a certain amount of accountability associated with announcing that, but she gave me permission. So Thea is a perfectionism expert and resilience coach, and Thea knows what is going on in the minds of perfectionist mothers and how to get them unstuck. She's a pioneer in her approach to busting the myths of perfectionism, transforming women's fulfillment at work and happiness at home. And her unique coaching style combines a deep, non-judgmental compassion with powerful insights and frank conversations about how to take action and make lasting changes. Thea is also a voice dialogue facilitator and has completed courses in mindfulness, acceptance and commitment therapy, and is a keen follower of the latest resilience, neuroscience and trauma research. She has a BA in history and sociology from Warwick University and an MSc in information science from City University. Thea previously worked as a business researcher in the city, and she's run her own coaching business for the past 17 years, also providing coaching, education and training for organisations including Gatwick Airport, Oakleaf Partnership and Warden Park Academy. And last but not least, we have Sarah Pratt. Sarah is another coach and trainer working mostly with leaders and high potential talent, something she's done for over 20 years in the UK, Europe and the Middle East after a career as an aeronautical engineer. Sarah studied with a wide variety of schools and is a graduate self-belief coach, tackling self-doubt's root causes to create greater confidence, self-trust and self-worth for her clients. She's also an advanced Pilates teacher and specialises in pre- and post-surgery, injury rehab, pre- and postnatal clients, and works sometimes as a part of a multidisciplinary team, which includes physios. Thanks for that last bit, Sarah. So, ladies, just in your bios, there were words that came up sort of allied to the concept of perfectionism. So we talk about perfectionism and almost in the same breath, self-belief comes up, sometimes imposter syndrome. And there are definitions that I'm sure the four of us have all come across and people will have read. But perfectionism particularly seems to be one that's a little bit difficult to define or find consistent definitions of. Sarah, if I start with you, what's your understanding of perfectionism?
Oh, that's a good one. So for me, and thinking about, the healthcare professions more broadly, when I'm in that Pilates headspace, let's take out the coaching headspace for a second, I want to get this right for my client because the difference it makes to their lives. So it's not about me getting it right. For me, it's about the person that's receiving my treatment. That's the person that's receiving my wisdom, my experience, my knowledge on how to sort their shoulder out, sort their back out, sort that wonky knee out, and having that real commitment of delivery for others. Therefore, my intention and the impact I'm having is not measured on what I do and how I do it. It's their results. That's what derives the kind of sense of perfectionism for me. When I put a coach's hat on over the top of that, I go, hang on, is there a bit of critic going on here? Is there a little bit of martyring going on here? Is there a bit of anxiety that I don't know enough? Is there that it's just safer not to go as far as I can be? And that for me is around the perfection of being good enough.
Sorry.
Yeah. And I think that's within there are great people in this team, particularly, like I said, I work with physios, I work with Reiki practitioners, Alexander therapists, acupuncturists. We're a really diverse mixed team supporting that one individual. And I have that, I'm not like you, and what I do is different. And is it as good? So there's a bit of comparisonitis, I think, in that multidisciplinary space. Yeah, I get that one-to-one with the client, and it's like, we're in my zone.
Yeah. Straight away, Sarah, thank you for going straight into the clinical world, because you just hit on two things which absolutely makes so much sense to me as a clinician. The first one, that kind of, in theory, displacing the perfect result for the client, but the result being, I have to equip myself to be able to manage every single situation perfectly, just to be sure, because I don't know what's going to come through the door. So I have to make sure that, the perfectionist in me has to be ready for everything. And then, that comparisonitis. And so many clinicians I've spoken to say that their understanding of perfectionism or maybe imposter syndrome is the most heightened when they consider their relationship with peers, professional peers.
Yeah.
So thank you. I'm sure already lots of recognition bells will going off with clinicians listening. Thanks, Sarah. Thea, what does perfectionism mean to you?
Well, I'm coming at it from more of a personal side rather than professional, at work, although it does impact in work as well, hugely. Because for me, my background was feeling like I was failing as a mother. And I realized that was because I had high perfectionistic standards of how I should be a mother. And those perfectionist standards were also in other areas of my life, but also mainly in my parenting, my mothering. And the way I would define it is, because obviously people say, well, aiming high, having high standards it's really good to do that. And so how I would differentiate perfectionism from just having high standards is that we think we can and should meet those standards. And therefore, when we don't meet those standards, it's somehow our fault and we deserve blame and shame. And so we have, as Sarah mentioned, a very loud inner critic that comes in and beats us up and tells us off. So it's, to summarize, it's a perfectionist ties their self-worth to their high standards, the standards they think they should get to, whereas healthy, aiming high, pushing yourself to achieve the most you can, knows that failure is normal, that we learn from failure, that we're still a good person if we failed at that, or are taking longer to get somewhere, or had to ask for help, that kind of thing.
Well,
that's the kind of the crux of what makes it different to just expecting a lot.
Yeah, really helpful there, because I have struggled to counter that. You always get that response, don't you? But I'm not a perfectionist. I just have really high standards, and that's a good thing. And you can't disagree with that. But yeah, it's really helpful to hear you say the distinction is whether you tie, as you say, your self-worth to that aim.
Yeah.
And it also answers to an extent something I often ponder. If there are so many perfectionists in the world, there must be some sort of evolutionary benefit to us as humans. Why do so many of us display this if it's all bad? But you sort of have described this scale where, yes, trying to improve and move forward, that's a very admirable and classic human trait, isn't it? But yeah, this little quirk that we have of making it define us or define our worthiness is really important distinction.
Yeah, I think the reason why there are so many of us is because it's a childhood coping mechanism. It's a strategy, a survival strategy. And it's really useful as a child to work out what we're expected to be and then try and be that person so that we are safe, we're looked after, we're loved. And then as an adult, those strategies continue because they're still part of us. It's not just cognitive, it's in our bodies, it's related to trauma with a big T or a little t, it's related to conditioning, and it's in our bodies as well as our minds. And so we, as a society, we don't question those things, and so it carries on, and it becomes maladaptive, dysfunctional as we're an adult. That's how I'd explain that part. Yeah.
And we get so much validation in that childhood era, don't we, for our efforts to become perfect.
And as an adult as well.
Yeah. Harriet, what's your take on perfectionism?
Well, it was interesting because as both Sarah and Thea were talking, I found myself trying to construct the perfect answer in my head, which made me kind of, just as I was observing that happen, thinking, oh no, I should say it like this and I should say it like that. And it was quite an amusing moment to observe my own perfectionist tendencies in there. And I wanted to reassure Thea when you were talking initially about, being worried you weren't a good enough mother. And I was nodding sympathetically. I wasn't agreeing that I wasn't a good enough mother. So it's interesting because with all the work I do, I like to come from a big picture, systemic, cultural perspective, because I think the individual picture is incredibly important. But I also think we can't ignore the water that we swim in. And yes, of course, perfectionism is about tying our self-worth to impossible standards and always wanting to achieve more, and perhaps judging others just as harshly as we judge ourselves, and pushing ourselves, and nothing's ever good enough. And we, people who struggle with perfectionism, I think all people who suffer with perfectionism inside don't feel good enough, but I don't think that all people who don't feel good enough become perfectionists. I don't think it's a two-way thing in that way. But I do think that we need to look at, when we look at what causes it, we have to look at the water that we swim in as well. And actually, there was a big piece of research that came out that was I think it was a 27-year study that highlighted a significant rise in the more toxic aspects of perfectionism, particularly in young people in the West. And that highlighted 3 core causes, none of which were individual, which is interesting because whenever and I've given a lot of talks on this subject, whenever I ask an audience, what do you think causes this? The first thing that lots of people in the audience shout out is family. But that's not what the research says. And I don't know whether they just didn't put it in the research. Otherwise, I don't know. So that's kind of my anecdotal evidence. But the things that came out in the research was that it's partly caused by measurement culture. So the extent to which we're measured growing up and in the workplace, and the importance that's placed on the results of those measurements. So, school testing, GCSEs, A levels, and in the workplace, you've got your weekly targets, monthly goals, quarterly this, annual appraisal, and every time it's always, you've got to do better. You've got to do, if you don't get these results, if you're not keeping up, if you're not doing better, you're going to fall behind, or something terrible is going to happen later. So it creates this sense that where you are right now is never good enough, and that you've always got to do more, learn more, be more. Then the research also highlighted capitalism, which is interesting because capitalism essentially is more culture, isn't it? We've got to be more productive, earn more, own more, how flashy is your car, how big's your house, how amazing is your holiday, all that kind of thing. How amazing is your job title? And so the media and everything, we're awash in that paradigm, aren't we? And then the media itself was the third prime cause that was highlighted. And social media is just basically a cesspit of compare and despair culture, isn't it? You compare your insides to other people's marketed, photoshopped highlights reel, you're never going to feel good enough. And then you marry that, as Theus mentioned, with everything that you've experienced in your life and the trauma and the maladaptive behaviors, and it's like this kind of, it's not surprising that perfectionism is on the rise with really negative consequences for people's emotional and physical well-being. So I do think it's important that we look at both the kind of top down, the cultural stuff, as well as people's individual life experiences, because it helps them to know, yes, there's things that they've gone through, but actually, even if they'd had the perfect life, there would still be these forces out there coming at them, making them think they've got to constantly self-improve. So
yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, it comes from outside. Our personal kind of ideals of perfection they all come from outside, and it's no wonder it all makes sense. Every individual example of a perfectionist developing, there's no wonder, it all makes sense. Our brain is wired to do this, and it's not our fault. We're not deficient, we're not broken, there's nothing wrong with any of us. This is our brains and our bodies, they're evolved to do this. They're working as they're meant to work. It's like you said, the sea we're swimming in is toxic.
And if we have to constantly be self-improving or try to turn ourselves into this, ideal in order to think that we're safe and that we'll be accepted and loved and that we'll have enough resources in our life and people in our life, then we'll go along with that, won't we? Especially if this huge fear, which it is put on all of us, that if we don't, you'll never meet a partner, if you're not thin enough, you'll never, whatever it is, if you don't achieve. There's so many conditions that are placed on us, and yet on the inside, sometimes it's really hard to think that anyone else is going through this, and you think it's just me who's not keeping up. So I know what, I'll just try to achieve more. And it's always that outside solution to what we're feeling on the inside. And you know what, the hit fades really fast, doesn't it? Yesterday's compliment doesn't work today. Last week's pay rise or whatever doesn't make you feel good enough today. And so you just can't win that game of trying to fix what feels wrong on the inside with stuff on the outside.
I'm getting this sort of image as you're talking, Harriet, almost like an outline of you and this membrane. This is the biologist coming out in me. And there's this sort of, in theory, we're always trying to achieve homeostasis and balance. And yet if the image outside is always being fed and filtered against some kind of internal barometer, and the internal can never balance, can never find that homeostatic period. So the only answer is always, as you say, more, better, harder, just to try and achieve balance with the external.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about that in terms of like the physio world. So much of that you can't control. The water that you're swimming in, whether you're an NHS practitioner or you're a private practitioner, you're set to the appointment times. You don't know who's coming when. You don't know whether they've been doing their exercises. You don't know what else has happened in their world until they arrive. If they arrive, are they going to be late? So actually your ability to deliver to your standards, to the NHS standards, to the practice standards, so much of it is outside of your control, yet we completely internalize it.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that lack of control over so many factors would lead a physio or someone in any industry, really, where it was the same, to push even harder, so that the thing that you do have control over, you're like, well, so long as I get my bit absolutely perfect, then maybe the rest will fall into place and I'll get results, happy clients, happy practice, Yeah.
You're both absolutely right. I'm often taught, how do I manage my self-doubt as a clinician? And the sort of perhaps not very helpful but obvious first answer is, give yourself a break. As Sarah says, you work in an environment where everything is unpredictable, and you may or may not be of a cohort that actually prefers more than average to have things right and controlled. And every day, every half hour, or however long your appointment time is, you put yourself right up against almost the worst challenge for a perfectionist. So, first step, acknowledge that you are trying to function in an environment which directly challenges one of your biggest personal challenges. Harriet, you touched, when you first started speaking, when you were talking about the water in which we swim, it made me think of really the comment from my previous episode with Daniel, which really made me want to dive in a little bit deeper, and because it surprised me. It was the part of Daniel's research, his qualitative research from interviewing therapists or physios specifically. It was the part that pretty clearly showed that, in his words, we drive perfectionism in each other. And I've had a few reactions from people who've listened to that podcast, and it's kind of amusing because I can hear in people's answers almost shame. So, oh my God, that means I'm not a good person because I'm driving something unpleasant in other people. But also, as your comment, you just said that we tend to judge people as harshly as we judge other people as harshly as we judge ourselves. And I think from memory, Daniel said, we possibly are people that like to be surrounded by other people driving themselves as hard as we are. And if we suspect they're not, we have quite a lot of judgment around that. Do you, Harriet, or any of the three of you, do you have any sort of insights into this driving it in other people concept?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I know when I was in my pre-children first career in investments, when I was running a very deadline driven team, it was absolutely a competitive sport. Who was in earliest, who stayed the latest, who'd met the most deadlines, who'd spotted the most errors in everyone else's work, so you could feel superior. It's so painful. And I think even on a personal level, if you're a perfectionist, or if your partner's a perfectionist, just the fact that someone always thinks that the other person is incompetent at loading the dishwasher, it's a real destroyer of connection and compassion and healthy and productive collaborative relationships. But I definitely see, and particularly in the more competitive workplaces and in the more masculine industries, there's this, and I guess often high achievers are drawn to those industries as well. And they are super bright, which and I wonder, is that it's quite a melting pot of pressures that
Here's that thing about the dishwasher. It's so true.
Honestly, I always mention the dishwasher when I give talks on this, because everybody in the room laughs, because everyone gets it, because we've all got our thing about dishwashers. I think that would just be like the gold standard question for finding out whether you're a perfectionist or not. Does everyone else load the dishwasher badly? Yes.
I'm feeling smug because my husband gets very annoyed with me, so at least I'm on the right side of that line. I am the dishwasher chucker. Sarah, Thea, does that some sort of driving it in other people mean anything to you? Do you have any other takes on that?
Yeah, so I would say that definitely in some people who are pushing themselves in work-wise are usually, let's say a lot of perfectionists also have a strong pusher, if you put it that way around. So if I come at this from a voice dialogue angle,
explain the pusher thing for people that don't know.
Yeah, so basically, when I started working with perfectionism, my definition of perfectionism was a lot wider than, let's say, the clinical version. It's not just we want things to be perfect. It's we also push ourselves too hard. We also take responsibility for everybody else's emotions. We also have strict black and white rules. We also have all these we want to please people and make people like us. We're worried about what will people think. So my definition has always been wider. And then I came across through Annie Stoker through voice dialogue. And voice dialogue is basically a theory of selves. It's a structure that really helps understand and manage the wider type of perfectionism that I deal with perfectionist mothers. And it's basically, it talks about we have different selves that develop. I talked about the conditioning that we have when we're younger. We develop these parts of us that we think are going to help us survive. And so we have a pusher and a perfectionist and a rule maker and all these parts. So that's why perhaps you, as the physios you were talking about, you've got this sense of responsibility for your clients, for the people you're working with. So that's not specifically, that's not really seen as a perfectionist trait, but I would say it often goes hand in hand with perfectionism, because we take responsibility. It's a strategy. We take responsibility for everything around us. So therefore, it's more likely to go well if we take control of it, or we're always looking out for something that's going wrong. So there's all these different strategies that help us be perfect. So that's that. And so you've probably got a strong pusher in you. So that's why maybe you are in an industry with lots of other pushers and perfectionists. But also the opposite of, in voice dialogue, we talk about primary selves and then disowned selves. And it's a bit like the shadow self, Jungian way of looking at things. But so the reason our perfectionist and our pusher or other parts of us developed was because the opposite was dangerous. So you squash that part down. So that we judge ourselves if we are lazy, if we're messy, sloppy, like careless, irresponsible, those kind of things, because we've squashed those elements of us. And so when we see those parts of us that we judge in other people, we then judge them.
Right. Yeah.
So if you start judging somebody for something, it's probable that you judge yourself for the same thing.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. Yeah, the part that you've decided is unacceptable therefore becomes unacceptable in other people around you. We should just say we've just had a fourth panel member join us. Very nice.
This is perfection, I just need to say.
What, your dog?
Okay,
Pretty perfect. He looks like at the moment he thinks you're pretty perfect as well. Look at that loving stare.
Doesn't have an inner critic.
It's been very good today when I've been working, but she just kept booping me from the floor going, "Mummy, I need a cuddle now." So sorry about that. But
absolutely fine. Very welcome.
Going to behave. She promises to behave.
I think we might have answered this to an extent already, or we have, but be really interested to know if any of you have anything further on it. So way back in one of my earliest episodes, I interviewed Margaret Collins, who's really, her speciality is imposter syndrome. And I remember her telling me this phrase that in the average population, 70-something% of people will display imposter syndrome feelings. And in healthcare professionals, a survey had shown that it's in the high 90s. And that I remember her saying imposter syndrome is particularly high in professions where technical ability is considered very important. So, absolutely, yes, we all get very into what we know, how we do it, what particular paradigm we work towards, and how brilliant we are at doing it or not. But I kind of have this suspicion that whatever profession people are in, it will feel like there are a lot of perfectionist people suffering with imposter syndrome feelings in their profession. Do you guys buy that it's higher in health professionals? And if so, why? Or if not, why? Maybe Sarah, because you probably have the most experience of us.
I can absolutely see why that is true. And I'd be interested, actually, Joe, in your answer to this too. We train together. Yeah, we train and we practice on each other. So you wangle the limb of somebody else around, you practice teaching an exercise, you practice using a piece of equipment with another student, observed by a qualified teacher. And that's all graded and it's all assessed, and you get hopefully constructive developmental feedback that says, okay, next time, what are you going to do differently? Have you thought about, if you stand over here, here's a trick of the trade, you kind of that way, not that way. And then the reality is you get to the day job and you take another human being who is in pain, who is uncomfortable, who brings a wealth of emotions and whatever it took to get them to you. And often in the NHS system, we've waited a long time to get that appointment. Or in the private system, we've had to fork out a lot of cash for that to happen. And you're in a room with them one-to-one. You are suddenly very alone. And you have all the technical knowledge. You wouldn't be qualified and have been released out on the public if you weren't, right? You've got it. You know the technical stuff. You've been assessed. You've passed. And then you're in a room on your own and there's nobody giving you feedback apart from the patient who doesn't know what they don't know, who has brought a whole heap of baggage through the door with them because you don't know what they're bringing. You can't possibly know what's going on in their lives. And the only person there that can make the judgment is you. And you get the, that wasn't so easy. And yet, really fabulous teams exist. And I'm not saying they don't. You can leave that room, you can go back into the staff room, you can go back out to your team, your supervisors, and go, I couldn't get that manipulation right. This patient I'm really stuck on. And occasionally you can go, can you join me in the room, Joe? I've got something. Can you? But that's few and far between. So these isolated patches, after quite a supportive, kind of holistic experience growing into the profession, I think that disjoint starts to fuel the imposter, because it's like, I'm not sure. Could I have done it better? And nobody else can help me with that one. Yes, you could be coached, and yes, you can be developed, and you can have supervision conversations with your team around you. And I know that happens and it's really powerful. But in that moment, that's difficult. Do I see it elsewhere? Yes. I do a lot of work in professional services. I see it with accountants. I see it with actuaries. I see it with specialists in whatever their field is. But they never end up, never is a strong word. They rarely end up in a small room with an individual that is in that state of emotional distress. On occasion that might happen, but not in quite the same way.
No, you're right. And you're speaking to something which everybody listening will identify with, that we train and we are not in any way unkindly, but we are sold the idea that perfection is possible, or the right answer is possible, and then we're thrown into a world that, as I said before, is completely unpredictable, and chances of being right are a lot less than perhaps we thought when we were learning the stuff from textbooks. And yes, you totally right that often you are on your own trying to navigate that and trying to coach yourself in your head when you haven't got a colleague to come and tell you that, yeah, it's the same for me. And the other thing that what you said made me think of is a lovely quote I saw just this week from a brilliant therapist, Joanne Elphinston. And her quote was around the fact that self-doubt should be our friend as a therapist. And I think when we start out, there's a lot of almost, when you're starting out and you're learning, and you can think of yourself as a curious junior, it's okay not to know, and it's really exciting to learn, and you've got all these seniors above you, and that curiosity is rife, and it's a really helpful curiosity, because that's how you learn more, and that's how you individualize your treatment, and you move away from the recipes. But there's something that happens to us, I think, as we get older. We start to think we shouldn't ask anymore. Sometimes we buy into the fact that we do know everything, and our curiosity is now, I don't know, there isn't that safe place, it seems, to be curious, which actually is so healthy for us and for our patients and our clients. So yeah, Sarah, it's a really accurate observation, even from the outside. Thank you.
I wonder if it's also a function of how much, the kind of personality and caring of somebody in the medical world and physios, that you go into that because you really do want to make a difference to people's lives. And so you really want to get it right. And also, of course, there's consequences if you do get it wrong, potentially.
Not just for ourselves.
Exactly. And I wonder how that kind of very unique set of factors plays in to being such fertile ground for perfectionism as well. I know somebody that I supported a while ago who hadn't made a mistake at work, but someone tried to say that they had, and it caused terrible distress to them. Because they'd never had a complaint before in all their decades of working, but they also accepted that sometimes, even when you make all the right decisions and you do what, sometimes it doesn't work either. And I think that, all of those things are really important to take into consideration with the unique set of factors for people in the medical world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you all have such understanding of, I think, what we feel. So I'm very conscious that I want a large part of this podcast to be about positivity. What do we do about it? We all have quite a clear idea of how the problem feels. I put out a question yesterday and today, just out on a couple of physio forums, and said, what do you want to ask? What do you want me to ask these experts? And unsurprisingly, the first question that came back was, how do we break the cycle of systemic perfection, not just ourselves? And I'm sure all three of you will have something to say on that. Thea, you want to go first on that one? How do we break this cycle?
The systemic one. So that's the $1 million question, isn't it? How do we change our culture that we live in? How do we value the qualities of human qualities that nurture children and keep ourselves safe? Things like compassion and curiosity that you mentioned, and trusting our inner wisdom. I think, Sarah, you mentioned that, that trusting our inner wisdom, that natural resilience we have inside us. There's I don't really know. I think I'm hoping that subsequent generations, I think there's a shift in younger generation now. They expect more, they expect different culture within their organizations, but then on the other hand, we've got social media, which is quite toxic, and the younger generation is growing up in that. I don't know, I haven't got any answers around that, but I think if I was going to hang it on one quality that I would love to see, I think it would be compassion. If we could develop a culture that is compassionate, that values compassion, that allows compassion, that treats people with compassion, that's the way forward. I would say that's going to make the biggest difference.
Yeah.
About how we do that, I struggle to know that I struggle to believe it's going to happen. It's going to be at the moment, I believe it's going to be gradual, and it will happen. I'd love somebody to come in and say, we can do it like this, and I'll be able to see some changes, in my lifetime. But I think it's going to be, I think it's really, really strong. I don't know. I don't want to be depressing about it, but we need brave, courageous people in organizations, in politics, and making a difference and creating those ripples. And we will get there. I believe we'll get there, but it's going to take some time. So that's why also modeling personally at a personal level. So doing both at the same time. You can't just do it personally. That you can, but that would take even longer. If every mother could compassionately treat themselves with compassion and then bring their children up with compassion, that would change the world. But that is going to take a long time till that happens. And I don't think we can, because we're humans and we're not perfect. We can't always be 100% compassionate to ourselves and our children. So I would say compassion, teaching self-compassion, so that we can treat other people with compassion and let go of the judgmental society we live in.
Yeah, thank you, Thea. And of course, such a mean question, because if there was an easy answer, we wouldn't even be having this podcast discussion. And I completely agree with you. Compassion, self-compassion, acceptance of the parts that we frankly find unacceptable. And, I hear what you're saying. It can't just be the individual, but also from what you said before about if we can't accept things in ourselves, then they become unacceptable in others. It's all just ramping up, as opposed to, I hear what you say, this slow breaking down. And also,
sorry. I was just going to say one thing about compassion, or not one thing, one of the important things about compassion that I think people don't necessarily understand is because we think about it being kindness and acceptance. But the thing that compassion does is it provides safety.
Yeah.
It takes us out of that threat mode, out of fight and flight. It brings us back into the amazing mind, body person people we are, so that we can act holistically rather than from fear.
Yes. And
the way we get over perfectionism is to learn to self-soothe and provide that safety, and compassion helps us do that. Perfectionists hate self-compassion. It's the worst nightmare. Why would you ever do that when you've been, spent a lifetime kicking yourself up the backside? But it is the superpower. It's our superpower. It's to self-soothe, provide our own safety, learn how to do it for ourselves. I help teach mothers to do it for their children, but it works in every situation, every case. At work, you could do it, friends, family, relationships, everything.
Absolutely. That ability to self-soothe in the moment as a clinician, to make yourself safe, to create a culture of safety, then that bravery and curiosity comes back.
That inner wisdom, you tune into that intuition. If you can self-soothe within a session, okay, I notice my inner critics, I'm worrying about this, I'm thinking I should know this, I'm criticizing myself. Let's just deep breath, bring some loving compassion to yourself. Breathe. You have to feel it in your body. You can't just do it in your mind. Okay, what do I know in this moment about this client? What am I feeling? What's the intuition telling me? As well as, the knowledge, it's both. And then you make the next step, and then you make a decision, and that's how you move through it.
Last night I started reading Wim Hof's book, because anyone that follows me on Facebook will know that I'm currently doing this March cold water challenge. Immerse yourself in cold water every day in March. And he was talking about, I've just, in the first chapter, he describes his childhood, and he describes himself as a very interesting, introverted child that didn't really get school, didn't fit in with that kind of the way people wanted him to be. But he describes this really strong sense of his own inner wisdom. And you remember what Harriet was saying about how perfectionism is exacerbated possibly by this constant testing of children, and are learning as health professionals that there are right answers, and if you learn more then you'll be better. And it diminishes, doesn't it, this sense that, as you say, Thea, yes, there's that knowledge in your head which you will draw on, but marrying it with that absolute deep-rooted, centered understanding that you were born with quite a lot of the right answers. I love that.
I'm just giggling. I work with a physio who is blind.
Yeah.
And I'm always curious, because there's a sense missing, so often I will look at how the person walks, how they're moving, how they come into the room with me. Like, oh, that's a bit out of balance. And he doesn't have that.
No.
And he is phenomenal. He is, I'm in awe, not because of his blindness, but he's just he is sighted or not sighted, he's a great physio. But it's really interesting. I find myself closing my eyes, and there's something about exactly what Thea said. I feel it in my body when I close my eyes and I've got my hands on the person. And I think as hands-on practitioners, hands-on therapists, there is the intuition there, but we have to let ourselves get to it. And it's how do we find those little tricks? I close my eyes. I don't know what yours is, Jo, but is it breath to get out of my head? Is it take a step back? Is it look at my notes for a second so I'm not being stimulated by what I see in the person? What is it that gets us out of that mode of here comes the imposter, here comes perfectionism? How do I get back into that? Yeah, for me, it's close my eyes. It's not that for Matt. For Matt, it's something completely different, but we've all got one. And I think that's one of the ways we can be compassionate about ourselves is what is it that works for us, and knowing it and trusting it and being able to step into it allows us to move beyond the textbooks, allows us to move beyond the right way to treat a knee injury that's is step 1, step 2, because no person works like that.
No.
Nobody
works. You're right, Sarah. We've talked about appointment times a few times on the podcast, and yes, we do have this. The perfectionist wants us to give every patient their full 30 minutes and go straight into the next one and be instantly able to come out of one person's physical, psychological, emotional stuff straight into that cocktail for somebody else. And I remember a physio I coached a while back, and she had this lovely description of, when I'm with a client, there's a balloon and I'm blowing it up and the pressure is increasing, and I don't let that balloon down before I go and start blowing it up again, or blowing up the same balloon with the next one. And I think you're describing, Sarah, find something for you, be it breath work, be it go and have a quick glass of water, go and just offload with a colleague, something that lets the balloon deflate before you go back in and start trying to blow it up again. And there is no recipe answer to the right thing for that, is there?
Not yet.
Not yet. Harriet, do you have any thoughts on breaking the cycle? You have a talk on it, don't you?
Many. I mean, we could start with white heteronormative capitalist patriarchy, couldn't we?
We could.
Just dismantle all of that. Yeah, that would help. But I think to be a little bit more serious, I mean, I love what both Thea and Sarah have had to say. And I think self-validation is super important here. And it was actually Jacinda, the ex-Prime Minister of New Zealand, who said, economic growth that comes at the expense of my people's well-being is not worth having. And I think we could all take a leaf out of her book when it comes to this, because ultimately the paradigm that we're in does value productivity and profit and results over well-being, mental and physical. over life balance, over character, actually, and humanity, and over the planet and so many other things. But wouldn't it be wonderful if we could get to a point where those things were more important than money? And even when it comes to the social media aspect, you know, Facebook, Instagram, Meta, whatever it's called, it knows that its algorithm pushes eating disorder content onto young girls, teenage girls, and that it creates body image issues, but it chooses to do nothing about it because of profit. There's so many things. And of course, as individuals and as mothers, we can try and protect ourselves by filtering our media and being careful. But as a society, as the human race, at some point, if we really want this to change, other stuff has to become more important than money. Ultimately, yeah, and obviously that's not quick to fix at all. And I don't want anyone who's listening to this coming away to think, well, the whole system is so screwed, I can never make any difference, because that's not true at all. There's so many things, like being careful of the media that you consume, like noticing the water that you're swimming in and questioning whether you want to buy into that paradigm anymore, whether it's serving you, recognizing your own and others' value way beyond their productivity and their money. Self-validation. There's so many things that we can do within that to support ourselves, and even just to be aware of things like measurement culture, and to kind of go, oh, hold on a minute, I've noticed that I'm pushing myself because there's this thing coming up, or I'm pushing someone else, and just pause and go, do I really want to do that? And often that awareness of the paradigms, that self-awareness of what our own perfectionism looks like, whether it's the dishwasher, whether it's the panic when a client, you know, arrives, or whatever it is, to just be aware of it, and then choose to go into a space of kindness with ourselves, and to choose differently when things maybe don't go to plan and you don't get the outcome that you want. To choose to go, okay, well, I've learned from that, rather than this mess up or this result that wasn't what I wanted means something detrimental about my worth, and I must work harder and learn more and do 50 million more qualifications and beat myself up and never sleep and whatever it is, you know. We do have a lot of personal and collective choice within the paradigm that we find ourselves in. So, you know, as ever, it's the kind of top down and bottom up choice. We're not disempowered, we're not powerless victims here at all. However, it doesn't serve us either to ignore the water, even if it needs a good change.
Yeah, I think it's an extra layer. I think there's an extra layer with the NHS, so the NHS side of physio, and other health elements of the healthcare, the public healthcare system, is all of those statistics and metrics are publicly available.
Yes.
So you can beat up the whole of the NHS when you meet your one physio who is running 5 minutes late because it was out of their control, or you've had to wait 12 weeks to get your first appointment and you're really uncomfortable. So there's a publicity level to the metrics that Harriet's describing that you don't get in other culture, in other kind of workplace cultures, because the
political spin as well, right? There's a lot of political spin around the doctors are lazy, or why aren't they working harder, rather than a focus on budget and personnel. There's that layer as well. And I can imagine some people who don't know to question perhaps, you know, what they're reading or seeing online. And as you say, that real fear as an individual practitioner when that comes at you, and questioning, is that true, you know, or just taking it on board and having to keep the person happy and thinking, well, so long as I get them the results, maybe they won't mind about the wait.
But it's also not just happening. I don't think it just happens for any kind of civil servant or kind of government related, you know, service. You get it like in the coffee shop over dinner. Oh yeah, you work for that hospital. I'm waiting 6 months to see someone completely different, and it's like you are the face of this, and you're not. It's nothing to do with you. You don't manage that organisation. You don't manage the money that gets sent out from central government. You have no control or influence. But you're the face of it. I see you've got the logo while you're on the bus on the way home. Let me tell you about. And there's a public set of metrics that you don't get outside of that kind of government supplied service, whether that's NHS, the Environment Agency, the benefits office, etc. And I think physios often, and other, they face that level of scrutiny about the wider industry that you don't get as an accountant, you don't get as a maybe teacher you do, but you don't get the industry perspective because you're an organisation. You don't work for that organisation. If you work for the NHS, the whole of the NHS is put on your shoulders.
You're so right, Sarah. And you reminded me of I won't get the quote exactly right, but I think it's Brené Brown who talks about perfectionism. And this has been quoted on this podcast a few times, where you have this voice that says, be perfect, do better, be brilliant, but don't let anybody see you trying. And boy, we take that on as clinicians, because it's my belief that the NHS keeps going because people are more than usually willing to keep buggering on when they're broken and smile at the same time. There's this shame around the fact that the organisations are failing, and we will keep trying to put that face on and hold that face up, all the while knowing that what's behind is shameful to us. And I'm going to say that not working in the NHS, and I don't want to put words or ideas in people's mouths, but that not letting people see you trying is huge. Thea, can I direct one last question from a clinician to you, because I think it's your area.
Let's hope. Let's not feel too much pressure to get it.
There's children in it. That's why I'm going to you. It was asked from a physio as a mother, so it wasn't really a clinician related question. So another Jo, a physio, I think, asks how to tackle this in children. She says, my son won't even try with a piece of schoolwork as it stems from not being able to do it well enough. You talked earlier about mothers influencing or modelling. What would be your thoughts on that question?
Okay, so the first thing that jumps out is it sounds like and perfectionists have this that fixed mindset. I think it was Harriet who said we're only as good as our last bit of approval, of praise, or something like that. And so why risk that by trying something new? So it's like fixed mindset. It's from that. The thing about perfectionists is we don't want to risk making a mistake. So we do keep us that. We don't try new things unless we're guaranteed it's going to work and that kind of thing. So it often comes from, again, this is not necessarily that this specific parent that has this has happened from there. It's in the wider culture and in schools. It's about praising effort rather than them as a person, not praising the outcome. It's the process, that they were curious about something, that they enjoyed something, that they had fun, doing this, or that they worked hard on this bit. It's that trying to encourage the intrinsic motivation, I think, from that kind of thing. And then the second thread on that, which is, again, another horrible thing that perfectionists don't like to do, is teaching children how to deal with their emotions. And it's really hard to do that when we can't deal with our own emotions. Believe me, my eldest is 21 in 2 weeks. So, and honestly, probably for the first 15 years, I pretty much was like a rabbit in the headlights whenever a child got upset. It's like, how do I stop that? How do I fix it? How do, and so we respond in a way that let's just try and make everything okay, when it's actually giving them space to have their emotions. And again, that helps if we know how to give ourselves the space to have our own emotions, that accept them. And I think perfectionists, a lot of the strategies that we have is to avoid those bad emotions. If we could learn to sit with the emotions which actually, whisper it, aren't as bad as we think they're going to be. They don't last as long as we think they're going to last. They're not nice. Some of the, the bad emotions, the shame or the fear or the hurt, they don't feel great, but they don't last as long, and they don't feel as bad as we think they do. The resistance causes so much more of those same emotions than learning to sit with them. And I think teaching our children to sit with them is a great gift to them. Not easy at all. I'm not saying, oh, just do that would be easy. It's not at all. But it's something that we can learn to do ourselves, and then we can support our children to do that as well.
Yeah. And even though that question was asked and answered in relation to parent and child, it makes so much sense as a clinician, because how hard do we as clinicians find it to sit with other people's discomfort? And other people's discomfort is placed at our table all the time. That's our job. And we're not taught to sit with it. We're taught as quickly as possible to fix it and take it away. And I think that's a really great tip to clinicians, if you can sit a little bit longer with yours and the patient's discomfort.
Yeah, it's holding the space so that you can acknowledge I see you, I hear you, I not necessarily, you don't always have to say I understand, I know what you're feeling, but it's I see you, I validate this feeling, I have compassion for you in this moment, I can hold this, I'm strong enough to hold this. I can do that easily with my clients. Find it harder to do it with my children because I'm more personally involved with them. But it's, I've had to learn to do that really. I had a crash course this year with my 18-year-old daughter, getting her through her A-levels in doing that. And it's really hard, but it's so much more effective than, okay, let's fix it. Let's do that, which is another self that, that's a way of thinking of that part of you, the rescuer or the fixer that wants to come in and make everything okay and smooth everything over. So everyone's okay and we don't have to deal with any emotions, it's that kind of thing. Again, totally normal. There's nothing wrong with doing that. It's a natural human condition, strategy. So there's no blame here at all. It's a way we cope, but actually it's not as effective as, like you said, sitting with a client. Wow, that must be really tough. Yeah. Just for a couple of seconds, pause. You're with them in body as well as mind, kind of thing.
So helpful, Thea. I'm sitting here as a clinician and mother of one child doing A-levels, one doing GCSEs as we speak. So all of it's going in.
All right. Just hearing you say that, it's really reminding me of incredibly helpful conversation I had a few years back with one of my surgeons when I had just before my breast cancer surgery, because one of them said it'll be, it's not going to be much fun for the week or two after, but don't worry. And the other one said the first 48 hours are going to be horrific, and then after that the emotional side will hit you and you'll probably cry for a couple of days. And by about day 5 or day 6, you're going to steel yourself and be determined to get home and out of the hospital, and you'll start to get a bit of determination and all of that. And it was the most helpful thing anyone had said to me, was that like real reality check and managing of the process, and actually not saying to me, actually, it's all going to be fine, when it wasn't going to be fine. Because then I didn't have I had an expectation of complete mess. So when the complete mess happened, I was totally fine with it. And I think that sometimes there can be this sense that you don't want people to know that it's going to be long and hard, or you don't want them to know it's going to be painful and it's going to be, the journey will be like this, but hopefully trend in the right direction. But I think actually there's so much freedom in being able to say that's how it's going to be. And as someone on the receiving end of that was literally the most helpful conversation and preparation for what I was about to go through that anyone gave me whatsoever. So I think sometimes
it's normalizing. Oh, sorry. It's like normalizing emotions. It's like, we're human. This is going to happen to us. This is fine. Nothing to see here. This is okay. And if we can help our kids grow up, know that these emotions are normal, then the powerful effect it had on you, Harriet, it will it makes such a difference. And it takes away the self kind of, I'm going to strong word, self-loathing that you get when you've got a strong inner critic that comes with a strong perfectionist. You end up judging so harshly and just kind of go, oh, it's okay, it's normal to, it's like 2 days before my period, of course I'm going to feel rubbish. Okay, it's fine. Okay, it's not my fault. It's not, there's nothing wrong.
Absolutely.
It's that, that's a really big point, actually. Yeah.
So helpful to hear that and realize that if we can lay out this kind of emotional roadmap for our clients, and remember that we're probably treating perfectionists as well, who will have perfectionist ideals about their own recovery, to be able to map it out.
Yeah.
All right. Now, I'm conscious of time, and I'm also conscious I'm going to be very cruel and ask you for something which you've already given in spades. I'm going to ask you all for a top tip, and I'll keep talking so you get an idea to think and your perfectionists don't go too wild and feel put on the spot. But absolutely, Thea spoke to the fact that this is not a quick fix scenario. If it was, we wouldn't be here having this conversation. And and Sarah spoke about, it's about small things, it's about individual things. With that in mind, can I ask you, just to finish off, to all give a small top tip that may be useful as a human being or a clinician, if you can think of something that's relatable to that scenario, just as a takeaway. And I won't put any of you on the spot. When something comes to your head, just go for it.
I don't mind going first, because actually, having heard what you said, I'm going to flip it on its head. I think it's stop the individualism. Yes, your treatment is in a small room. Yes, a lot of what we do as physical practitioners is isolated to ourselves and the client. For me, the biggest learning is being able to go out and talk to somebody else about it. It's build the connections around you who get it, who know what it's like to be in that room on your own. And that might be, we used to call them BMW sessions, bitch, moan and whine. And the wine was spelt differently depending on the time of day. But just be able to go, ooh, that client is a real energy drainer. They really suck the life out of me, and have somebody else go, yeah, I get it. Not even to not to problem solve it, not to go, well, what I do is, yeah, there might be an element of that. Of course there might be, but just to kind of go, yeah, I see you and I hear you and I experience something similar. So for me, yes, it's an individual experience. Make it a collective experience, because that normalizes the emotion that we just talked about. It normalizes the experience. It normalizes this is part of being great at what we do.
Brilliant.
So don't be
BMWs.
Be a collective, and BMWs help.
I'm putting it on the list for my clinic. BMW sessions. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So I've got something around kind of self-talk. So it's building on what Harriet said about self-awareness. It's crucially important to build that self-awareness. And one way, and that self-awareness then allows you to separate from whatever's going on. You become an observer of what's going on. And that's what's happening in the room, what emotions are there, what thoughts are there, what stories, narratives, beliefs, personas, we talked about selves, which part's in charge. So one of the things that I found really useful, so now I don't call myself a perfectionist anymore. I used to call myself a recovering perfectionist, but I don't do that either. I say I've got a loud inner perfectionist. So in the moments, if you're in a session, it's like, oh, I'm noticing my inner critic, or I notice my inner perfectionist is really loud. It's really worried about getting that right or not making a mistake. So it's like, okay, it's not the whole of me. It's just a part of me that's worried here. So it's like, it's okay. You can maybe soothe that part. It's okay. I know you're worried, but I've got this. I'm trained. I've got experience. I'm an adult now, because these are quite young kind of emotions often. Okay, I've got it. And it's like separating that it's not you, it's part of you. And calling it something different. You don't have to call it an inner perfectionist. You could call it, I don't know, Doris or something, whatever you want to do. But it's that separation, that self-awareness creates that separation. So you don't believe it all. It doesn't seem so heavy and doom laden.
Yeah, and I hear you take the reverence out of it. Don't have so much reverence for this perfection.
It's only one opinion. You've got loads of other opinions in your head and your body, so you don't have to listen to that one. We're just used to listening to it.
Love it. Thank you, Thea.
Dial it down.
Dial down the perfectionist. Harriet.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value in doing two things. One of them is reframing it when things don't go to plan, and recognizing that just because it didn't work out quite how you wanted, it doesn't mean that everything's a failure and that you're a failure and that you should throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I like to call these kind of things wisdom moments. You know, when we're young and we're at school and we get something wrong, no one points at you and goes, you should never ever come to school and never ever try maths again. It's like, oh, you're learning. Because you're making mistakes, you're learning, and that actually making mistakes is seen as a really good thing. And when I was very first training and launching my business, one of the principles I was taught is there's no failure, only feedback. And it took me a long time to get my head around it, but I think that's something. So that principle of just reframing things that don't go to plan and seeing the wisdom in it, and that you're growing, you're evolving, you're learning as you go, and that's okay. And I think also there's something in terms of collaboratively, how can we all counter something like measurement culture? How can we be kinder to ourselves and to our colleagues? And if you're the person doing the review, or you're the person setting up the review structure, how can you take all of this into account? Is it possible that the measurement structure is creating a more toxic culture in the workplace? And that's something that I think organizations, practices can look at, and that individuals could also feedback and say, hey, do you know what, the pressure so much because of this, that it's actually making me so stressed that it is creating an even greater likelihood that I will make an unnecessary mistake, or that I will burn out, or that I will, my stress levels will become so high that I'll need to take time out. So I think there's a lot to be said for organizations having a look at what's going on there, and just seeing whether, and knowing that actually sometimes it's enough to just pat someone on the back and say, you're doing great. There doesn't always have to be a stretch. That right now you're doing great. It doesn't need to always be another level.
Absolutely. I remember one of my children's teachers saying he wished he could say that more. He said, I don't want to give them the stretch all the time. I just want to tell them they did a good job. Oh, thank you so much, ladies. You've given me personally so much to think about as a clinician, as a mum, as a friend, as a human being. And I love the different takes that you've all brought to this. You've really widened, for me, the understanding of perfectionism, and offered some views on it and some solutions that I hadn't thought of at all before. Thank you so much for your generosity of your time and your experience and your wisdom. Just going around one more time, people will have loved hearing what you've all had to say, and I'm sure they'll be very interested in your individual projects. Sarah, if I start with you, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
The easiest way is to look me up on LinkedIn. Please spell Sarah with an E, S-A-R-A-E, and Pratt has 2 T's. I do know if you spell it with a H, I come up with a very different kind of profession that's not suitable for work. So Google me on LinkedIn, Sarah Pratt with an E and 2 T's, and you can learn a bit more about what I'm doing there. At the minute, you'll see I'm talking a lot about women's leadership development, whether you have leadership with a capital L, with the job title, the badge, whatever it is, the uniform that goes with it. How do you lead? By leading through self first. Yeah, there's lots of stuff on there. That's great.
Thanks, Sarah with an E, S-A-R-A-E. 2 T's.
Please.
Harriet, how could people get a hold of you?
Again, LinkedIn's the best place. I'm very lucky to have a unique name. I'm the only person with my name in the world, so you'll find me quite easily. And my website is just my name.com without the hyphen. It's under construction at the moment. It's having a refresh, not in a perfectionist way, just having an upgrade. So if it's online, just come and connect with me on LinkedIn, and soon enough it will be back online.
Lovely, thank you. And your names will obviously all be in the title of the episode, so people can find those. And Thea, what's the best way to get hold of you?
So probably first place is my website. It's theajolly.com. And I've also got a membership group, which is heartspacemothers.com. So that's another place to go and have a look at if you want to. So
Heart Space Mothers, lovely. Thank you. Thank you so much, all of you. Really appreciate your time. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Best of luck with the book, Thea. Well done.
Thank you.
I look forward to talking to you all again soon. So I hope you enjoyed that session. I'm sure there were lots of aha moments. You may have recognized yourself in some of the situations that the panel described. You may recognize colleagues. Maybe you recognize situations not just within healthcare, but within other industries that colleagues, friends, spouses, partners work in. I think what I take away from this is that the collective is so important. We touched on this idea of the waters in which we swim, the perfectionist paradigm that is all pervasive, particularly in our culture today. And whilst there are definitely things to work on within ourselves, it's almost driving the inner perfectionist to make it entirely an individual problem. So let's, as Sarah said at the end, be open to discussion. Let's open the door and talk to each other about how we feel. Let's compare, let's share, let's work together to see what small steps and maybe very large steps we can take to start to shift the tide, to change the emphasis on what's considered important, what's even considered perfect. Let's be open and honest and vulnerable and see what changes we can make in our healthcare environments, in our families, in our communities. Let's try and break this cycle of perfectionism, or even just start to chip away at it a little bit, whatever's possible in our professional lifetimes and our own lifetimes. As ever, if you are a clinician, parent, friend, colleague, perfectionist in any or all of those spheres, be kind to yourself, be kind to others, be curious, be compassionate. Take very, very good care, because you matter.
There are two things that all MSK therapists have in common the world over. They love free trials and also exercise prescription. So if you're a chiro, physio, osteo, or some sort of ostchirisio hybrid, then head to rehabmypatient.com/physiomatters now and get 3 months on us of the best exercise prescription software available.